What's up, everybody? We're on a podcast now. I'm Alex, and in this video, we're back again to talk about Clive Barker's Hellraiser revival. That's a tough, by the way, it's saying the whole thing kind of harder than you might think it is. We've talked about this game a couple times. Every time, I always maintain this very positive attitude. I really do believe it's going to be a very, very good game, and, I've talked about hopefully the potential that this can not even just get more Hellraiser stuff, because that's awesome, but, can we please have this be good to show that these kind of single-player things, Quiet Place was just last year, and Quiet Place kind of rocked for what it was, to be honest with you. Can we get more of these? I talk about Scream, all that jazz. So, always very high on it. And one thing I've been pretty kind of strict on, very specific is, if you're doing this, you got to go for it. And I think they're very aware of that. I think they've been aware of it, since the very beginning. But it's something we've talked about, in these videos that, Hellraiser definitely pushes the envelope, as they would say. And it really goes for what's the rating, and then it goes for that rating, and then it gives a little more where there's kind of like a cutoff until the next rating, and it reaches just kind of that line. I haven't even watched all these movies in their entirety, but I've seen like so many recaps of them, and I've watched, I believe, the original two. I mean, yeah, they can push it. And so with this game, I mean, we've already heard about like how much they're freaking pushing it, from the visuals of what these characters are going to be doing, how they look, they are going for it. But there was this interesting quote, I think, from IGN a couple of days ago, where they talked about the rating, and they talked also about just going for it. So I wanted to read that for you. So they say, "We are going to go as far as we possibly can, as far as the people that make the rules will let us go. And I hope that we can make one version, but we are willing to go as far as we possibly can go." And there was a little extra stuff that I kind of found cool. "We want to be a responsible publisher/developer, but we are going to push it as far as we possibly can in the context of the game and the movie." And they talk about Clive Barker, and they say he's come back and said, yeah, Pinhead wouldn't do that, and he's come back and said, yeah, you got to tweak this a little bit, because this is his world, and he knows stuff that we don't even think about. And he's been really fast, too. Sometimes when you work with famous people, you throw something over, and 6 months later, they come back and they complain about something. No, he's that on it. So let's talk about that last part first, because I find that to be almost equally interesting, because, we hear stories. I mean, I think, honestly, it really, is the Disney's, and when you think about the Marvel games or Star Wars games or even DC stuff, I mean, we have heard horror stories. To be honest with you, we've heard horror stories of, the creative director, right? The person who's just in charge. We've heard stories about them taking forever, where developers will be making things, you got to send it over for approval, and they come back months later and they throw kind of a wrench in things. So we've heard that. We've heard, the Disneys of the world that, you send over, hey, is this costume design okay? And they could take weeks or months to get back. So, and we've heard that on a bigger scale. Hellraiser, Clive Barker is very famous, and he is very awesome and very, legendary, but, it's not the same level, I think, even remotely close in terms of that kind of size. So that's very, very good to hear. And honestly, just even giving an example, because, the title is literally Clive Barker's Hellraiser, which I do think is important, but, you talk about, okay, that he's playing a part, he's kind of watching it. But again, we've heard that, when people in Hollywood talk about producers or executive producers, half the time producers don't actually do anything. They just have that kind of title, right? So having Clive Barker's name, it could just be a thing that you just have his name, but turns out, no, he's constantly, around in that way, and he's ready to help them, where they need help. And that's, that should give us, I think, as gamers, a lot of confidence, right? Especially if you trust him, because it's he's going to be the one to steer them in the right direction if they go off the path a little bit. So I love to hear that. And then, well, the rating thing is kind of what we opened the video talking about, right? I find it cool / interesting that they talk about the whole, we hope we can only make one version, right? So it's yeah, because, the thing is, if they push it too far, if it goes, and really now what this is, right? There's M rated, and then there's, I believe, X, and X is the whole, you back in the day, back when you would go into stores to get games, remember, I believe X-rated games were the ones that you can't have visibly showing. You actually have to, I think, hide hide them, and it needs to be an adult. I don't think that like an adult could even buy it for a child that was there. I think it had to be for the adult. So, like if you got to that rating, and there's very few games, it's a cool little, I've looked into it a little bit in the past just for history purposes. There's some games that did it, but getting that rating, by the way, is a death sentence because your game was hidden so badly, you couldn't even really sell it. So you couldn't do that, right? You have to go for M-rated. That's the highest you're going to go. So, to their point, if they push it too far and then they're told, hey, you got to cut, it's one thing to say you got to cut one or two things, and it's another thing to say, hey, you got to cut half the game. Half the game is just pushing it too far. So, you don't want to push it too. It's interesting because we want them to push it far, but you do have to be pretty conscious of this and say, okay, how far can we really go? And then if we go past that line, we got to be ready, because that, what that really does is it leads to delays. I guess like that's the quiet part out loud. That's why I'm saying all of this. I don't really care if they have to go back and say, well, we got to scrap, levels 5, 9, and 15, right? It's like that's for us, that might not mean much, but I'll tell you what it does mean for us is if they are told that, and they're told that late into the game, that means that we're either not getting a full game because maybe they just have to scrap entire pieces, or the game's going to get delayed because they're going to have to fix that stuff. So, that's something that I think, have to have a really good pulse check on, which it also kind of, I don't think it's that difficult. Everybody kind of knows what you can put in a game based on the ratings. I guess sometimes you can be caught by surprise, but it's not all that common. So hopefully they know what they're doing. I think they do. But it's good to hear, that they probably know that line, and they're going to get as close to that line as humanly possible without stepping over it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.